cryptography aspect. So public key cryptography was developed at MIT in the 1970s, but that's a lie. Actually, British espionage agency, MI6, they already developed it in the 50s, but we didn't know that they beat the MIT professors to the punch by about like 15 years. But it was ready, all these technologies have been ready for decades. It was just Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin. He put them all together. It took like 30 to 40 years after the technologies were available, but finally something happened and we had a eureka moment. We'll get there. But the account system is really simple to understand. Imagine we had a lot of transparent lockers where you can see everything that's in them, in particular in reference to that book we were talking about, how much of something is in there. Anybody could walk up to your locker and see through the wall, and they can even put more money in, but they can't take it out. The way that's implemented in Bitcoin is really simple. You start with a number, this is called your private key or a password, and it just uses really sophisticated mathematics that you don't need to understand to go in a one-way street. It'll start with the number that you started with, it'll show you where your locker is, and then you can use that number to unlock your locker. So if somebody comes up to you, but if somebody comes up to your locker, they don't know what number you started with, so they can't open it. So basically, you have a key, anybody can look and see what's inside, but only you can open the box. And the reason only you can open your individual box is because you started with the number that led you to that box. Continue on. And then finally, to tie all this together, you need a filter against spam and cheating. So it's called proof of work or mining. So providing security, it's made deliberately expensive and challenging. So the way you provide security to the Bitcoin network is you provide computational power. And when you provide this computational power, you're rewarded for it by being given the Bitcoin itself. And what this is a compensation for your time, for your effort, for the electricity that is wasted, as is controversially mentioned, like, in ecological context, and that Elon Musk uses to BS everybody. But the idea here really is just to hurt any cheaters that are in the system. It should be as hard as possible, deliberately, very painful, to provide security so that your role as the gatekeeper is not taken advantage of or abused to change the numbers in that book. So you're actually familiar with this sort of technology all the time when you do these bullshit reCAPTCHAs where you have to answer that you're not a robot. This is how you're proving that you're actually an individual, and by wasting 1 minute of your time, you're unable to spam and you can't have bots that just perform meaningless activity. So this proof of work concept in which time is money and you're not going to cheat because it's so painful to even participate in this that you would not want to defect, you wouldn't want to backstab the system because you'd only be hurting yourself. That's how this is implemented, and that's known as mining. So the eureka moment, now you'll be able to understand, at least I hope so as close as possible, the actual paragraph in the white paper, 2008-2009, where he introduced Bitcoin. You just combine these three concepts together in a common sense way. It sounds like this. We're going to have a book, and that book is going to have it's going to store numbers, how much belongs to everybody. Your right to the number is secured by your key, which is just a number that you made from a one-way street. And then we're going to make sure that everybody agrees on the copy of the book or the ledger, because there's just so many copies of it on everybody's computer, you can't possibly cheat. And then you're going to incentivize people to maintain a copy of the book by making them do really time-consuming manual labor, not with their hands anymore, but with expensive machines called mining, and we reward them for their time with Bitcoin. They wouldn't want to compromise this number because they're paid in this number, and they wouldn't want to compromise it otherwise because it's so expensive that if they were to defect, they would only be losing their own time and effort and be banned from the network. But wait. It still makes absolutely no sense, because you might be wondering, why does anybody care about this number at all? Why would people do things for a number to go up? Why would anybody care about Bitcoins? Why does any of this appear to have any intrinsic value whatsoever? It still seems like a bunch of BS. It's just a book. It's just this record of numbers. People are making it go up. There's incentives for people to protect it. There's incentives for people not to cheat it. But why would anybody care about the number? They're just getting paid in that very number, in the quantity of Bitcoins that they have, to protect the value of Bitcoin. Why? Where is the income coming from? And you have that. Yeah, so I like to list it in terms of basically two statements. The first statement would say that Bitcoin is valuable because the integrity of the ledger is secured by the miners. And the second states that the integrity of the Bitcoin ledger is secured by it because it's valuable. But it doesn't make sense. You get a chicken or egg style paradox, and you don't know what really comes first. It's like holding two mirrors up against each other. So I'll simplify that. Bitcoin is simply the asset that backs itself. That would be the simplest way to express what Bitcoin is as a concept. And what's actually remarkable to me is that this is reminiscent of characterizations of God or just spirituality and theology that I've seen in medieval Aristotelian philosophy. I am a philosophy major, so this is my perspective. So I think that Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza was a philosopher who was in the lineage. He was heavily influenced by Maimonides. Not quite Jewish philosophy, but he was operating in that vein. He was actually excommunicated, but they now regret having excommunicated him since he did become one of the most notable, notorious philosophers of all time. But you see this pattern come up, and this is where the beauty derives from. The answer is Bitcoin really is simply that beautiful currency which backs itself. It does not need anything more. It does not need anything less. It is paradoxical, so it's like staring into the sun. It dares to take a shortcut. I mean, you might ask, what backs state currency? And you have to go through an infinite chain of causes that might have to do with, okay, the government backs it, it pays taxes in it. The government has a strong military. The military is secured by its victories. The victories were because of luck or chance, or intelligent and strong people who backed it. There's a promise that the government will continue to sustain itself in the future to give value for the currency. But at the end of the day, no matter what you do, if we follow this infinite chain of causes, we have to say that the reason that our money has any value is in God we trust. And Bitcoin takes a shortcut. It doesn't claim to have any sort of authority besides itself. And that is precisely what's beautiful about it. And it echoes just a lot of beautiful mystical and esoteric concepts that you find in philosophy and across the world of religions. But it really is like staring into the sun, like our friend over there. I wouldn't think about it too long, and my buddy likes to joke that they don't let rabbis study the true meaning of Bitcoin until they turn 40, so I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about this yourself. Alright, now with that part over, let's go through it there. Okay, so it's just a natural extension of the Bitcoin concept. Simply as I can put it, instead of just keeping track of a number, like how many Bitcoins people have, let's give people ways to keep track of anything. And what you do is you just introduce the ability to create contracts. You write in code ideas for how numbers are manipulated, rules and regulations for that number, and expectations that you have. And now you have an abstraction layer. You have an infrastructure for creating stuff that isn't just keeping track of a number, but possibly keeping track of many things and the way that those things interact. So that was Vitalik's question. Why stop at Vitalik Buterin is the creator of Ethereum, if you're not familiar. Why would you stop there? People should keep track of anything they desire, govern how it's being tracked, and create methods for automating the transformations of these values. So just like you expect a stock, if you are a stockholder, you expect that your rights would be laid out in a number of contracts. First, you would expect that you'd have certain protections and expectations for how that stock functions based on legal contracts that define that stock's behavior, and protections like in the context of the US government, city government, regulatory groups. And then you would also expect that you have certain voting rights and such within the company, within corporate policy and the legal framework that the company has for itself. Now, all we do with Ethereum now is we speak in the language of computers. So if you could think it in terms of machine code or in terms of a programming language, now you can submit that to the blockchain and you will have essentially a virtual representation of a stock. It's like a city. So let's say I want to make my own coin. I don't need to rally a bunch of miners to create the base layer of the protocol anymore. I can just deploy a contract to the blockchain that is going to create the coin and have the underlying security abstracted away. I don't need to know how it's protected. I just know that it's on top of Ethereum. And just like in a city, we all pay our taxes, hopefully. I mean, I'm not too sure about that. But whenever you use Ethereum, you pay Ethereum to the network in exchange for any transactions that you do. It's exactly the same concept as Bitcoin. And it's literally one-to-one identical. The only difference is now you have those contracts and code for execution. Okay, here we go. Now I'll explain what NFTs are. It's really not that exciting. Okay, so there's two types of contracts that you should be aware of. So there's fungible and non-fungible. Fungible just means interchangeable. It possesses a quality that's like a coin. If I have 100 of a certain type of coin and you have 100, if I have 100 bucks and you have 100 bucks, we could swap it. And there's not really a big deal. I'm not really gonna interrogate you about your funds. It's liquid, low friction. I'm contrasted with non-fungible. So that's just the term that we use for assets that are like a car, a house, a watch. They have an individualistic nature. So if I have a Rolex and you have a Rolex and you say let's switch, I'd be like, hold up, wait a minute, mine might be different from yours. There's a lot of different parameters. They are alike in some sense, but they're not alike in others, and we actually need to compare and auction them. And this means that it's illiquid. It takes time for that value to be determined. If you want to sell your house, you need to do it a couple months ahead of time. And that's what non-fungible tokens represent. That's really all it is. And it's not really that impressive. It's a buzzword that's been fed to the public by venture capitalists. Yes, this is just an illustration of what I said before, so I'll leave it up for 10 seconds and then Larry will move to the next one. And the main use of them is art. So we can have different pieces of art that are represented by NFTs. Some of them, like CryptoPunks or Bored Ape Yacht Club, have gotten astronomical valuations. This is what you've been seeing in the news lately. It's simply using this type of contract to represent art. And people have been going crazy with it, making money. And we'll go on. We'll be talking about this in the next slide. Oh, and I guess a quick technical thing. It's really easy to use them. You get a browser extension that acts as a bridge between your coins and the sites you visit. And then you trade them on a marketplace site like OpenSea, which is a clone of eBay. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So Kanye West recently said on Twitter that don't ask him to do NFTs. He doesn't see anything that he could really do, nothing particularly viable about it right now, and I actually completely agree. Almost all of this buzz resulting from, as I said, a very venture capitalist collective buzzword that's just been to create art. It's premised on the idea that some people will buy that art for art first and sell it to fools that come along later, where they have the rarest item. There's nothing intrinsically interesting about the art itself. It's just that people dive in and try to get in there first or make the right connections. There's a concept of whitelist, which is basically when you're friends with creators of these artworks who let you buy them first, knowing they will be able to resell them for 100 times the original value that you paid for it. So let's see where we're going to go. Okay, story time. This is where my NFT comes in, and I'm going to take you down the chain of reasoning that led me to develop my own NFT. I'll tell you about a Greek myth. This is where I turn to the tale of Parrhasius and Zeuxis.